Okay, well, let's continue on in our final unit here, kind of discussing some big things in relation to society, human nature, and how we ought to live our lives more specifically. Right? I kind of gave you the characterization that we can think of this unit as talking about different philosophies of life, how you might want to live your life moving forward so that it's happy, healthy, and fulfilled. Well, y'all had the option at the beginning of the semester to either talk about transhumanism, which is a philosophy of life that leans into technology, that encourages the development of technology and even augmenting our bodies and our brains using technology. Except y'all chose the other reading, which I found surprising, but very welcome, because this is a topic that is dear to my heart. Bless you. So today we're going to be talking about Neo-Luddism, which is a philosophy of life that seeks to reject a lot of modern forms of technology and live without them. Because the Neo-Luddites see technology as degrading human society in a lot of different ways and making our relationships in human life in general worse. So that's what we're going to be investigating today. I'm going to give you a brief lecture. We'll watch a video, and then I hope to have a discussion about this stuff with you, see what you all think. But before we jump into the article today that I asked you all to read, I'd like you to have a small discussion with the people next to you. In what ways has technology impacted your life? Talk about that with the people next to you. I know that's a big question. How has it impacted your life positively? How has it impacted your life negatively? Go ahead.
Glad that me and you both went the same route.
Facts. It made college easier. Well, now you don't have to go all the schools. You don't have to go all the schools.
Say more about that.
What teacher actually follows the syllabus? Like, I don't think I've ever actually read the syllabus for that teacher actually. It's all on Canvas, baby.
Right. Do you see these technologies being good?
Wait, she does Canvas? Well, yeah, that's her fault, but then you don't have to do extra work.
Yeah, until you actually do have to do extra work and you have a whole project due in
What about
because you take it.
Well, right, you can reach anybody at any time, right? You have access to the internet, which is an amazing thing. Yeah.
That sounds really cool. I have so many ideas. Is that, what is that, HVAC?
How these technologies impact your
They're
lives.
combining this.
Let's talk about that a little bit as we.
I'm taking HVAC.
Okay, let's bring it back towards the front here. What did y'all say in your groups? How has technology impacted your life, both positively and negatively? Yeah?
It allows me to stay in touch with people I care about.
So which technologies allow you to do that?
Most of them. I mean, cell phones, laptops, video games.
Video games, right? Yeah, you can play with your friends, right? Talk to people in the different lobbies and stuff. Yeah. That's good, right? It allows us to be in communication with others. What about other technologies? How saturated is your life with technology? Could you even put like a number on it, or do you have a sense of how much of your daily life is taken up by using technology in some way? Yeah.
I feel like a lot of
Right. And y'all drive cars, right? Y'all have jobs that use computers perhaps or other forms of technology in the workplace, right? This university is run on a whole bunch of different technological systems, right? Yeah, what were you going to say about
Medicine.
Medicine, yeah, in the healthcare field, right? Not only like scalpels and instruments like that, but CAT scanners and EEG machines and all these different things, right? Yeah, technology has come to saturate human life more and more since its inception, thousands of years ago when the wheel was invented, even more so when the transistor was invented. Now, everybody has a laptop or a computer, everybody has a phone, almost everybody in the Western world has a car or uses a car. Yeah, there are a lot of great things about technology. What we're going to be looking at today, though, is kind of the dark side of technology. What technology has done to our individual lives, our relationships, society in general, politics, and the environment. There are a lot of unintended consequences of allowing these technologies to structure human life, how they saturate society. These perhaps unforeseen consequences, these negative impacts, are going to be what we're primarily investigating today. And to do that, we're going to look at a piece written by the author, activist, cellist Glendinning. Glendinning is an American author and activist. She's written on environmentalism, indigenous peoples, feminist social political theory, and her works that we're investigating today, the one essay we're looking at today, focuses on technology's impacts on human life. She is what we would call a Neo-Luddite, someone who is trying to advocate for kind of backing away from using a lot of these technologies that we have today, because she thinks that they have, well, harmed people and they're continuing to make society worse in some ways. She promotes what's called bioregionalism, which is this idea that people generally, it would be healthy and good for them to kind of stay in a particular region, not travel too much, but use the resources and develop community at the local level, not trying to be some sort of global traveler or somebody who really leans into the use of these information technologies or communication technologies, but rather living in a way that is more sustainable, more community-based and oriented, that doesn't require, transporting avocados from Mexico in order to eat your breakfast, but farming the land that is around you and using the resources that are around you. Today we're going to be looking at what's called Neo-Luddism. But in order to understand what that is, first we need to get a grasp on what is Luddism. What makes somebody a Luddite? Well, Luddism was a 19th century social movement that was composed mostly of textile workers. These people opposed technology because they saw that these different technologies were being developed that could put them out of work, out of their factory jobs, ways of producing textiles, clothing, and other things that no longer required the use of human hands. And so they opposed the saturation of these technologies into work life, into society generally, and many of them went so far as to actually take hammers and bludgeon weapons and destroy these forms of technology in radical opposition to its transformational force, because they saw that if these technologies would come to saturate the workplace, it would put people out of jobs, it would make human life more difficult, and it would decrease our ability to be independent. One of the common threads we're going to come back to today is, although technology has been useful in a lot of different ways, and it's made human life more convenient, one of the unintended consequences of it is allowing it to continue to saturate human society makes us dependent on it, right? Now, you can't buy something without using technology. right? Without using a credit card or without using cash that comes out of this giant technological system, this currency. You can't get from place to place without using technology. And because this technology is so widespread, it's now expected of you that you will have to drive places or travel places in order to get work done, visit people, etc. And even laptops, phones, email addresses, all of these things are now required to get a job, required for you to live in contemporary society. So the increasing saturation of technology into our lives has made us more dependent on them and made it more difficult for us to live independent lives. These Luddites challenged at the time what you might call laissez-faire capitalism, which is this view that markets should continue to expand, they should become, or will inevitably become, global in some senses. Products and businesses expand into other regions, other markets, by locating different needs that humans have. And so they oppose the amalgamation of power, of resources, capital, and wealth that ends up being a result of the privatization of the means of production and of wealth. This view also emphasizes individualism, which is something that we saw in our unit on social and political theory. Right? This idea that people are independent, autonomous, rational individuals who are solely responsible for the creation and fates of their own lives. A lot of these Luddites didn't like this view, because what that ended up producing is a state where people were more disconnected from their community. Their relationships suffered. They weren't really engaging to the same extent in social outings and rituals that provided life with meaning before the saturation of technology into human society. Neo-Luddism basically just means new Luddism. When you hear neo, just think new, a new form or a new kind of ideology. The Neo-Luddites are based on this view, this social movement in the 19th century, but they've evolved a little bit to and adapted to the changing forms of technology that we have today. The Luddites and the Neo-Luddites along with them that we have today supported older, more decentralized socioeconomic systems. What they saw as a good was not this kind of globalized economic system that we have now, but rather a more interconnected village life that focused on work with those around you, community, and family, rather than exacerbating the kind of atomization that we see today, where you work a job maybe in the next town over, you don't know your neighbors all that well, you live by yourself or maybe with a friend in a concrete box downtown or in some city outside of downtown, etc. They saw the saturation of technology as degrading kind of relationships between people, disconnecting them, separating them, and transforming society in a really seriously bad way. They saw the invention of these machines as a threat to their way of life. These textile machines that really could put them out of work. Companies no longer would have to hire people. This is known as the problem of automation, which we're going to be dealing with in the near future. It's estimated that within the next 30 years or so, maybe half of all the jobs in the U.S. are going to be done by machines and robots. That's going to put a lot of people out of work. This is a direct result of the saturation of technology into human life. What are we going to do with all these people? How are they going to make a living? How are they going to make ends meet? So there's a very real threat here. With the evolution of technology comes a lot of different social and political changes that I think are useful to meditate on. And the Luddites saw that, and the Neo-Luddites are still talking about that to this day. So we could classify Neo-Luddism, or define it as a philosophy and way of life that opposes the saturation of many modern forms of technology into human life, such as the computer, the cell phone, nuclear technology, like nuclear bombs, for example, bioweapons and genetic engineering, the fact that we have built our society on all of these digital and technological infrastructures that make us weak, for example, to EMP pulses and things like this. So the Neo-Luddites today, which are based on this social movement in the 19th century, have changed their views a little bit and are now opposing the modern forms of technology that saturate our life today. Many of you are using a laptop. All of you, I assume, have a phone. The Neo-Luddites don't like this. They think that it is having negative impacts on our relationships, on our mental health, on our communities. And so this is what Glendinning has to say about technology and society. Just as recent social movements have challenged the idea that current models of gender roles, economic organizations, and family structures are necessarily normal or natural, so the Neo-Luddite movement has come to acknowledge that technological progress and the kinds of technologies produced in our society are not simply the way things are. As philosopher Lewis Mumford pointed out, technology consists of more than just machines. It includes the techniques of operation and the social organizations that make a particular machine workable. The infrastructure, right? The economic, digital, information technology infrastructure that we have. In essence, a technology reflects a worldview. Which particular forms of technology, machines, techniques, and social organizations are spawned by a particular worldview depend on its perception of life, death, human potential, and the relationship of humans to one another and to nature. In contrast to the worldviews of a majority of cultures around the world, especially those of indigenous people, the view that lies at the foundation of modern technological society encourages a mechanistic approach to life, to rational thinking, efficiency, utilitarianism, scientific detachment, and the belief that the human place in nature is one of ownership and supremacy. The kinds of technologies that result include nuclear power plants, laser beams, and satellites. This worldview has created and promoted the military-industrial scientific media complex, multinational corporations, and the urban sprawl. Stopping the destruction brought by such technologies requires not just regulating or eliminating individual items like pesticides or nuclear weapons. It requires new ways of thinking about humanity and new ways of relating to life. It requires the creation of a new worldview. So when the Neo-Luddites oppose technology today, they're not just talking about devices. They're talking about the way that we've set up society, the way that our organizations, education, media, military depend on these technologies and can no longer do without them. And they need to talk about a certain way of thinking about the human's relationship to nature. All of these things are kind of wrapped up in this term of technology when the Neo-Luddites use it. Okay, so they're proposing a change in worldview, not just the destruction or the elimination of certain devices, but a change in worldview, a change in our way of life, a change in outlook with respect to whether technology has actually been good for us, whether technological progress has actually resulted in healthier people, healthier relationships, higher quality of life, more life satisfaction, etc. And so nowadays, if one just looks around, if one just meditates on how much technology saturates our lives, what we notice, and what the Neo-Luddites argue, is that we are being barraged with technology, machines, certain techniques and modes of production, forms of social organization which prioritize the use of technology, which depend on it, which cannot do without it. In very real, kind of difficult to conceptualize ways, our entire lives nowadays are built on technology. Like I said before, without technology, we wouldn't be able to purchase anything. We wouldn't even be able to get a job nowadays. We wouldn't be able to go to school, right? Get an education without relying on and using technology. And what's more than this is that on account of the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution, our relationship to technology has changed, and you might say has become a little bit more mindless. We kind of assume that technological progress is a good thing. We assume that by making advancements in technology that that's going to be a good, that that's going to help us. But the Neo-Luddites argue that's not actually the case. What has happened as a result of advancements in technology? Well, we've conditioned ourselves to believe that we should be the masters of nature, that nature is just a product or a thing for us to use, right? Consequently, a lot of the ways that we produce and a lot of the organizations and institutions that we're a part of are degrading the environment, right? We like to be able to use phones and laptops to communicate people, but in some fundamental way, even though we're more connected than ever, we are more disconnected than ever, right? And so the Neo-Luddites argue that our lives are becoming more and more saturated with technology and that this is a bad thing. Okay? We're not thinking about our use of technology. We're not really thinking too much about how it's impacting us, how it's making human life worse. What we're caught up in is this latching onto technology because of its convenience and because it's now become a necessity in modern life. We don't critically engage enough with this fact that technology is now everywhere and our lives depend on it. And that's what they're trying to get us to think about. And so, Glendinning says, Neo-Luddites think modern forms of technology are, quote, out of control and desecrating the fragile fabric of life on Earth. As we'll see, technology is having negative impacts on health, politics, society, and the environment. And it is producing new dangers that we don't seem to be able to control. For example, nuclear warfare. Without the advancement of technology, we would not have the nuclear warhead. But now it seems like we're in a giant prisoner's dilemma because everybody has nuclear warheads now, and nobody has control over them all, and because fallible humans are operating them, there's a very real possibility that we could destroy ourselves, right? If not with bombs, then perhaps bioweapons. These are some of the primary things that Neo-Luddism is trying to get us to think about. And so they're going to encourage us to scale back, stop relying on so much of this stuff. Change our infrastructure, change the architecture of our lives so that they do not depend so intensely on these things, which are actually not making us better off. And so we get the sense that in Neo-Luddism, in their philosophy, they question the claim that technological progress, pure rationality and efficiency, and technology itself is a good for human life. Certainly there are a lot of technologies that are useful to us, right? Forks and knives, you could argue, are pieces of technology. Those things are great, right? Hammers, stools, chairs, tables, these are all forms of technology, right? They were invented by humans to serve a particular purpose. These things are good, right? But do we really need to go beyond those kind of primitive forms of technology? Do we need giant factories? Do we need all of those consumer goods that we have? Do we need phones and laptops? Do we need to do research, genetic research into genetic engineering for foods or for humans? Or research on viruses and bacteria? The Neo-Luddites are going to argue that technology in general has brought about the destruction of nature, socioeconomic inequality, lack of community and connectedness with those around us, subservience to technology, right? We become dependent on it in a lot of ways. New dangers, I said before, bioweapons and nuclear warfare. And in general, lack of fulfillment in human life, and in some ways, lack of freedom. We've constructed this entire socioeconomic system on technology that forces us to work 5 days a week, right? That forces us to work for somebody that we probably hate, producing things that we don't get to keep, producing things that we don't need for our lives, that adds to the destruction of the environment, producing things that might, in fact, cause or exacerbate addiction, right? And so, in some ways, technology has opened us up to new ways of life and new ways of thinking. But in a lot of ways, we're kind of constrained by the technology that we have created. Jacques Ellul would argue that now we serve technology. Technology no longer serves us. It's almost as if technology is a force in and of itself that is carrying us along with it and making us do its bidding rather than the other way around. And if you don't believe this, just look at the current state of artificial intelligence research, right? People say that, oh, we need to slow down AI, or AI is this awesome thing, we should lean into it. But nobody has control over this, right? AI research is continuing. Even though a petition just came out by a bunch of scientists and thinkers and philosophers that there should be a halt on AI research for 6 months, that's not going to happen, right? Technology itself seems to continue to move forward, and in large part, no any one individual has control of it, or where it's going, or how it's going to impact our lives in the future. And so to get a little bit more specific, the Neo-Luddites are going to say that technology has had some profound negative impacts on human life in relation to health, politics and society, and the environment. Firstly, let's look at health. On account of technological advancement, we are now doing research and we have the capacity to create bioweapons, right? Think of mustard gas, or think of a virus being released on people. We have the power and the ability to construct bacteria and viruses that could wipe out populations. Nations are doing this research, right? And they've thought about using bioweapons before. Perhaps the United States government has. Think about how technology has impacted food production. When you go into the grocery store now, the majority of the foods that you'll find there are processed foods, right? Made with all of these substances that you can't pronounce with really long names, made with dyes, mass-produced in factories. This stuff is not good for us, right? We know that dyes are linked to diseases such as cancer. We know that these substances that are used in the manufacturing of food products are leading to heart disease and diabetes. Think of all the sugar and all the foods that we eat. That is not a healthy amount of sugar to eat. That is in a can of soda, or that is in your fast food, or whatever it is. Technology has allowed there to be fast food, which is degrading people's health. Or we can talk about social media, which I'm going to play a clip about here in a little bit. Technological progress has allowed for the invention of things like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, etc. And although this allows us to talk with people, is this stuff actually good for us? As we'll see, probably not. What does social media do to people? It increases their anxiety and their depression, decreases their self-esteem and their self-worth, because they're just looking at snapshots, curated snapshots of the best parts of people's days all the time, right? And then getting jealous when people get more likes than another person. As we'll see in the clip that I'm going to play for you here in a few minutes, it would seem that the use of social media specifically has increased rates of teen self-harm, especially in young girls. Over the last 9 years, rates of self-harm, hospitalizations have increased for young girls over 100% from where they were in 2009. This is correlated with the use of social media. These technologies, like Facebook, like Instagram, are creating addictions in people, right? How many of you have a friend that can't go a minute without looking at their phone? Even though we don't like to use the word addiction, this is an addiction. Okay? If you can't go a day without looking at your phone or looking at your laptop and scrolling on social media, you can know pretty convincingly that your biology has been gamed by these people who have created these social media platforms. If you want to look into that, watch the watch the documentary The Social Dilemma, I think it's called, on Netflix, which goes into how harmful using these social media technologies is for human development, for mood, for sleep, regulation of emotions, etc. There's video game addiction, right? There's pornography addiction. All of these things are possible because of technological advancement and because of how technology has saturated our human lives. Video games and pornography in particular are affecting young men in very bad ways. What we're seeing now socially is a lot of men don't leave their parents' houses until way later in life. This is called the failure to launch. We're seeing social trends that are showing that men are experiencing failures to launch at much higher rates than they were in the past. We can also talk about how these technologies affect our sleep, our mood, our exercise. We know that looking at your phone before bed is not going to be good for your sleep. That blue light messes with your sleep cycle, right? And so the use of these technologies has real effects on human health, physical and psychological. But what's more than this is that it also seems that technology is exacerbating social and political problems. The United States today is more politically polarized than it ever has been. Half of the people don't trust the other half of the people in the U.S. There's even talk about a national divorce, right? This is something that was going around during the time of the Civil War over the issues of slavery and the economy. This is being talked about today. Some are even hypothesizing that soon we're going to experience a civil war between those on the right and those on the left. Cohesion in society has dissolved. No matter what side of the political aisle you're on, I'm betting most of you in this room don't want to talk to, hang out with, or have anything to do with people on the other side. Right? Maybe we even hate them for their views. This stuff is being exacerbated by news, media, technology, which is kind of not forcing, but driving us into echo chambers online, into small little ponds where we only discuss issues with those who have like-minded beliefs, right? Never really talking across the political aisle, but only associating with those who have the same beliefs that we do, the same worldview that we do, generating feelings of anger and resentment of the other side, increasing political polarization. If we want to get a little bit Marxist with this, we can talk about the work that we have to engage in Western society. It's argued that before the saturation of all these modern forms of technology into human life, the work week, so to speak, was much less than it is now. Humans did not work as much as we do now. They tilled their fields and harvested it and gathered and did chores around the house, and that this equaled out to maybe 25 hours of the week of work, rather than what a lot of you are experiencing, which are 40 or more hours per week. Making stuff that you don't get to keep, if we follow the Marxist analysis, alienating you with respect to yourself, the products of your work, putting wealth into the hands of select few people who do not then redistribute it to the rest of society, but hold on to it and buy things like massive yachts that they don't need. And as we talked about before, this is also making us less independent human beings. Right? It's true that as children, we need to rely on our parents in order to survive. But think about how many skills we don't have now because of the saturation of technology in a human life. How many of you have survival skills? How many of you know how to start a fire without flint? How many of you know how to hunt and skin an animal? What were we to do if this whole technological infrastructure around us collapsed? Well, a lot of people would be fucked, right? They would not be able to survive. They don't have those skills. And we could also say that in some areas of human life, our dependence on this technology constrains us in certain ways. You feel the expectation to jump on social media or to download an app or to engage in a certain way of life because everybody else is doing it. Right? This is probably the argument that you gave to your parents when you were younger. But all my friends are on Instagram and Facebook. I'm going to be left out if I don't do that stuff. Right? That kind of forced you into a particular way of life out of fear of missing out, fear of being left out or being made fun of. And our increased dependence on this stuff has made it so that now we can't live without any of it. Right? You can't do your work without your laptop, your schoolwork. You can't reach your family members and your friends anymore if they live in another state without a phone, without email. Right? And finally, technology is having adverse effects on the environment. We can talk about pollution in general, pollution in the atmosphere caused by production and manufacturing processes. We can talk about waste and pesticide and herbicide runoff into rivers and oceans. We can talk about all the trash in our rivers and our oceans. Acid rain, how forest fires and sea levels have been impacted by our use of technology, by our spitting of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere in these large-scale industrial processes that we rely on to keep the economy and our society going. This is having really negative impacts not only on the organisms living in these environments, decreasing biodiversity, killing off species, but also on humans as well. There are a bunch of microplastics in your body right now in your bloodstream that you're never going to be able to get rid of. That's due to technology. And these microplastics are not good for you, okay? You don't want to be ingesting them. You don't want to be eating them, okay? They're going to have adverse health effects. And we can't get them out of our food supply. Now we're kind of screwed. Do some research into this. It's really messed up. If you want to be even more freaked out, do some research into the tap water where you live. It's probably not safe to drink by FDA standards, but yet that's the water source we have available, right? In some real way, technology has made all of this possible. All of this is a result, in part, of technology and the saturation of technology into human life. In relation to the negative effects of technology with respect to social media and mental health, I'd like now to play a clip for you, which is a podcast, the Lex Friedman podcast, talking to psychologist Jonathan Haidt, who discusses the impacts of technology on teen mental health.
I have a lot of questions whether it's fundamentally the nature of social media that's the problem, it's the decisions of various human beings that lead the social media companies that's the problem. Is there still some component that's highlighted in the column of the American Mind, that's the individual psychology of play, where the way parenting and education works to make sort of emphasize and fragility of the human mind as it interacts with social media platforms and the way that humans do the social. So all that beautiful mess.
That should take us an hour to take up.
Or maybe a couple of years, yes. But, so let's start, if it's okay. You said you wanted to challenge some things that Mark Zuckerberg has said in conversation with me. What are some of the ideas he expressed that you disagree with?
Okay, there are two major areas that I say. One is what is happening with teen mental health. It fell off a cliff in 2013. It was very sudden. And then the other is what is happening to our democratic and epistemic institutions. That means knowledge generating, like universities, journalism. So my main areas of research, where I'm collecting empirical research trying to make sense of it, is what's happening to teen mental health and what's the evidence that social media is a contributor. And then the other areas, what's happening to democracies, not just America, and what's the evidence that social media is a contributor to the dysfunction. So I'm sure we'll get to that because that's what the Atlantic article is about. But if we focus first on what's happened to teen mental health. So before I read the quotes from Mark, I'd like to just give the overview. And it is this. There's a lot of data tracking adolescents. There's self-reports of how depressed, anxious, lonely. There's data on hospital admissions for self-harm. There's data on suicide. And all of these things, they bounce around somewhat, but they're relatively level in the early 2000s. And then all of a sudden, around 2010 to 2013, depending on which statistic you're looking at, all of a sudden, they begin to shoot upwards. More so for girls in some cases, but on the whole, it's like up for both sexes. It's just that boys have lower levels of anxiety and depression, so the curve's not quite as dramatic. But what we see is not small increases. It's not like, 10%, 20%. No, the increases are between 50 and 150%, depending on which group you're looking at. Suicide for preteen girls, and thankfully it's not very common, but it's 2 to 3 times more common now. Or by 2015, it had doubled. Between 2010 and 2015, it doubled. So something was going radically wrong in the world of American preteens. So as I've been studying it, I found, first of all, not just America, it's identical in Canada and the UK. Australia and New Zealand are very similar, they're just after a little delay. So whatever we're looking for here, but yet it's not as clear in the Germanic countries. In continental Europe, it's a little different, and we can get into that when we talk about childhood. But something's happening in many countries and it started right around 2012, 2013. It wasn't gradual. It hit girls hardest, and it hit preteen girls the hardest. So what could it be? Nobody has come up with another explanation. Nobody. It wasn't the financial crisis. That wouldn't have hit preteen girls the hardest. There is no other explanation. The complexity here, the data is, of course, as everyone knows, correlation doesn't prove causation. The fact that television viewing was going up in the 50s and 60s and 70s doesn't mean that that was the cause of the crime. So what I've done, and this is wrote with Gene Twenge, who wrote the book iChat, is because I was challenged, when Greg and I put out the book, The Cause of the American Mind, some researchers challenged us and said, you're talking about the correlations between social media use and mental health. They exist, but they're tiny. It's like a correlation coefficient of 0.03 or a beta of 0.05. Tiny little things. And one famous article said it's no bigger than the correlation of bad mental health and eating potatoes, which exists, but it's so tiny it's zero essentially. And that claim that social media is no more harmful than eating potatoes or wearing eyeglasses is a very catchy claim, and it's caught on. I keep hearing that. But let me unpack why that's not true, and then we'll get to what Mark said. Because what Mark basically said,
And by the way, just to pause real quick, is you apply, because it's made explicit, that the best explanation we have now, as you're proposing, is that a very particular aspect of social media is the cause, which is not just social media, but the like button and the retweet, a certain mechanism of virality that
well,
was
that's
invented, or perhaps some aspect of social media is
okay, good idea. Let's be clear. Connecting people is good. I mean, overall, the more you connect people, the better. Giving people the telephone was an amazing step forward. Giving them free telephone, free long distance is even better. Videos. So connecting people is good, not a luxury. And social media, at least the idea of users posting things like that happens on LinkedIn, and it's great. It can serve all kinds of needs. What I'm talking about here is not the internet, it's not technology, it's not smartphones, and it's not even all social media. It's a particular business model in which people are incentivized to create content, and that content is what brings other people on. And the people on there are the product which is sold to advertisers. It's that particular business model which Facebook pioneered, which seems to be incredibly harmful for teenagers, especially for young girls, 10 to 14 years old is where they're most vulnerable. And it seems to be particularly harmful for democratic institutions because it leads to all kinds of anger, conflict, and the destruction of any shared narrative. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about Facebook, Twitter. I don't have any data on TikTok. I suspect it's going to end up having a lot of really bad effects because the teens are on it so much. And to be really clear, since we're doing the nuance now in this section, lots of good stuff happens. Like, there's a lot of funny things on Twitter. I use Twitter because it's an amazing way to put out news, put out when I write something, you and I need to use it to promote things. We learn things quickly.
Well, there's going to be, now this is harder to measure, and I'll try to mention it because so much of our conversation will be about rigorous criticism. I'll try to sometimes mention what are the possible positive effects of social media in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, in the way I've been using Twitter, not the promotion or any of that kind of stuff, it makes me feel less lonely.
Mm-hmm.
To connect with people, to make me smile, a little bit of humor here and there. And that at scale is a very interesting effect, being connected across the globe, especially during times of COVID and so on. It's very difficult to measure that. So we kind of have to consider that and be honest. There is a trade-off. We have to be honest about the positive and the negative, and sometimes we're not sufficiently positive or in a rigorous scientific way about we're not rigorous in a scientific way about the negative. And that's what we're trying to do here. And so that brings us to the Mark Zuckerberg event.
Okay, but wait, let me just pick up on the issue of trade-offs because people might think how much of this do we need? We have too much of that. No, that's a one-dimensional conceptualization. This is a multidimensional issue. And a lot of people seem to think what would we have done without social media during COVID? Like we would have been sitting there alone in our homes. Yeah, if all we had was texting, telephone, Zoom, Skype, multiplayer video games, WhatsApp, all sorts of ways of communicating with each other. Oh, and there's blogs and the rest of the internet. Yeah, we would have been fine. Did we really need the hyper-viral platforms of Facebook and Twitter? Now, those did help things get out faster, and that did help science Twitter sometimes, but it also led to huge explosions of misinformation and the polarization of our politics to such an extent that a third of the country, didn't believe what the medical establishment was saying. And we'll get into this. The medical establishment sometimes was playing political games that made them less credible. So on net, it's not clear to me.
Okay. So the Neo-Luddites are actually going to go farther than Haidt. And they're going to say, it's not even some social media that's bad. We don't need to be using social media at all, really. But what's more than that is there are other forms of technology that we should also be worrying about, such as what I've mentioned before, these bioweapons that could hypothetically be created, how prevalent nuclear warheads are now across the globe, these systems that we're relying on that are destroying the environment, that are having negative impacts on human health. All of this stuff is stuff that we need to be concerned about. And so the Neo-Luddites reject modern forms of technology for all of these reasons. Okay? They do not implicitly accept that technological progress has been a good thing. They think that technological progress has conditioned us to take on a materialistic worldview, where we care about clothes and fashion and jewelry and video games and furniture and all this crap that we don't actually need. Thinking that if we get the next consumer product, we're going to be happy or we're going to be fulfilled, when this actually isn't the case. And they reject also this prioritization of efficiency that we see in our society, that we see in the workplace, that we see in college. Right? You've already internalized this view. You get upset at yourself when you don't work as much as you should, when you're not as efficient during your study time, right? Your boss gets down on you when you're not as efficient in your job. So much of our minds and so much of society now is geared towards production, of crap that we don't need and of stuff that is actually harming us, according to the Neo-Luddites. And so in general, we could say that they see technology as having political and social ramifications, setting up and conditioning a certain destructive and unfulfilling way of life, and straining our relationships with others. And again, they're not just talking about devices. They're not just talking about computers or phones or credit cards. They're talking about this whole social, economic, political system that we've set up that is dependent on this infrastructure, that is dependent on the flow of information, that is saturated with digital and information technologies. Okay, this is what they mean when they say technology. They basically mean this whole system that we've set up that forces us to need laptops and phones, that makes us prioritize material things instead of social relationships or spiritual fulfillment, that degrades nature, that sees nature as something that humans should have a mastery over and just use, rather than a worldview which stipulates humans are just a part of nature and we shouldn't try to achieve mastery over it, because doing so has had some bad effects on organisms, on ourselves, on the environment, on the climate, etc. So they see technology as interwoven with every aspect of human life. They don't just want to go around and destroy laptops and phones and microwaves, okay? They want us to completely change our worldview and our relationship with technology. That is the primary goal, which is going to require an extremely wide-ranging revolution in human thought, speech, and action. And so at the end of this article, Glendinning offers kind of some principles, some ideas to think about if we want to move towards a society and individual human life that is distanced more from technology, or at least thinks more critically about our use of technology. She says that the contemporary Neo-Luddism movement encourages the dismantling of nuclear, chemical, genetic, television, electromagnetic, and computer technologies. So, removing these things from the human way of life, detaching ourselves from them, reconstructing our infrastructure so that we no longer have to rely on email, phones, computers, microwaves to cook our food, financial systems built on ones and zeros. She doesn't think that technology is bad totally. Okay, there are a lot of good technologies, a lot of technologies that perhaps we want to keep, such as running water, right? Such as tools like knives and axes and shovels, plows, plates, bowls, water bottles, perhaps, nets. These are all good and useful things. But modern forms of technology, all these technologies that are continuously giving off all of this electromagnetic radiation, like computers, laptops, nuclear power plants, all of these things, these modern forms of technology are what they're primarily critiquing, okay? They're not saying all of technology is bad and needs to be avoided or destroyed. Just these modern forms that we've built our society on, that we are now dependent on, that open us up to new vulnerabilities, that constrain our freedom. So she encourages searching for new forms of technology which actually respect human life and are utilized by communities to strengthen their relationships, rather than these devices, these social media technologies that are disconnecting us from one another, polarizing us, driving us further apart into resentment and hatred of one another. And so she would say that Neo-Luddism in general encourages the use of technologies that are focused more on community, that are environmentally conscious. Permaculture, does anybody know what permaculture is? It's living a way of life and constructing homes that are more at one, we could say, with nature, rather than just chopping down whole forests, but building around the trees, using the natural life in the plants and the organisms for our purposes in environmentally sustainable ways. Technologies which are more conducive to supporting natural systems, and the construction of systems in general which encourage responsibility and participation in what she calls real human life. Not this life that has been molded and undergirded by the use of these technologies that distance us from one another, but actually spending time with one another, strengthening our relationships, strengthening our relationship to nature, etc. And so the Neo-Luddites would like to see a return to creative expression, spiritual fulfillment, and community upkeep, all of which is kind of being constrained or degraded by the modern forms of technology that saturate our lives. Is anybody familiar with the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski? This was a guy who was an extremely intelligent individual, started his college career at 16, ended up becoming the youngest professor at Berkeley up until that point in human history. Well, later in his life, he kind of secluded himself from society, built a cabin, I believe in Montana, away from people. And once authorities started building a road into the forest in which he was living, he started thinking critically about technology and wrote a manifesto on industrial society and technology to try to argue against the saturation of technology into our lives. His solution was one of violence, though. He ended up sending bombs through the mail to people who support these technologies and exacerbate them. Eventually he was caught, and I believe he's serving 5 life sentences. So I'm not saying violence is the answer, but there are people who are thinking and who are worried about this issue. Okay, and if you haven't thought about it before, you might want to meditate on it. You know, how is social media impacting you? Is consuming news and scrolling all the time making you healthier and happier? What kinds of systems are you supporting with your actions and your education and the jobs that you are working? You know, are you contributing to the betterment of society and human relationships? Or are you causing harm on the other side of the world with your consumer purchasing decisions? Right? How are your actions impacting the environment in your support of these technologies? These are all things that I think everybody should at least reflect on. Right? I'm not saying you have to change your life, but think about it. You know, that's what this class is all about. Investigating these different perspectives and views. Trying to come to a better understanding of what it is that we believe and how we ought to live into the future. Okay. So, what do you think of this philosophy of life, which encourages detachment from these technologies? Detachment from social media, using smartphones and computers less. Is this something that you like, or is this something you don't want to engage in?
I agree with most of it, except for one thing. The medical technology, I think should stay
Okay.
advanced, because without it, I wonder how the COVID pandemic would have been.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. There are a lot of great medical technologies that save people's lives all the time. Right? On the other hand, it's paradoxical the effect that technology has on people, even in the field of healthcare. There's an anecdote that a surgeon in France once told. He used to engage in a lot of different organ transplants. And he said, you want to know what's funny about organ transplants? The majority of the organs that I use to save people come from car accidents where people die. And so he says if we make safer traffic laws, we're going to save less people through organ transplants. This was in the 70s. Isn't that kind of weird? Right? So our relationship with technology is very strange. Right? We notice the ways in which it aids us because it makes our lives really convenient. Right? We don't have to make our meals around a campfire and wait ages for that to heat our food up and stuff. We have access to these healthcare technologies. So I would agree with you there. I think healthcare technology is really useful. Yeah. But what do the rest of you all think? Do you like this view? Do you ever feel the desire to want to move away from a lot of the forms of technology that saturate your life? What do y'all think? Yeah.
I like this view.
Well, what do you like about it?
I like how it's like detachment from like the modern technologies, because like I agree that like other technologies are important, but like I feel like technology, like you can't escape it. Like there's no way out.
That is an interesting claim, right? I kind of agree with that in some sense. I mean, this stuff has come to saturate our lives so much. I often have the desire to change the relationship I have with all of my screens in my house, right? My phone, my laptop. I feel like I am a slave in some sense to these technologies. But at the same time, is it possible to do without them? Is it possible to detach ourselves from them and restructure society? Or have we gone beyond a point of no return? What do y'all think? Yeah.
I think it's inevitable that society heads in that direction just because it's progress. Like,
Ah,
there's like that thing where it's like a great filter of like whether society is like before, have you heard of that? Like, will humans eventually just make themselves go extinct due to AI or nuclear warfare, and like is that inevitable just because individuals, especially with AI, like I'm a data science major, individuals are always gonna try and explore that area more and more because it means making more money and
right.
it's just more efficient to use AI. And I just don't ever see a point where everything or everyone comes together and says to stop it because there's always going to be someone doing something to make more money or to be more greedy. And I do think it's inevitable that that's the direction that society heads.
Okay, so you think we're kind of doomed to keep on the path of technological progress? We can't escape it.
I don't think it's doomed, but
Yeah, that's a negative way of looking at it. Maybe it's a positive thing. Yeah.
yeah, it's just I think it's just you have to. Every individual has the ability to manage how they interact with technology, but it will be more and more influential.
Okay.
I just don't ever see the day where you go backwards because then businesses, like, why would business choose to be less efficient if they have the opportunity to use artificial intelligence?
Right.
Because humans are greedy.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who are very afraid of what research into AI is going to end up producing. And there are a lot of people who are like, this is how we solve all of the world's problems. Right? Once we construct an AI that itself achieves general intelligence and becomes self-aware and wakes up, it will be able to solve the problems of economic inequality and environmental degradation and social issues and all these things. We'll have AI overlords that make society perfect for us. Does that sound cool to anybody? Imagine a life in which you don't have to work anymore. All jobs have been automated by machines. You can spend your time painting or hiking, being out in nature, or writing poetry, or writing your book. Right? Wouldn't that be cool? Not having to work at a dumb job that you hate for a boss that's a meanie head. Yeah.
You mentioned painting, but AI is currently stealing from artists.
Does it say more about that?
So like the AI is like taking pre-existing artwork and just meshing it together without consent of the artist.
This is a big thing in digital artwork, right? There are people who spent years coming up with their style and working on it, and I think AIs have won more than a few art competitions now, right, for digital artwork. And this is making artists a little bit scared and angry, right, that they could be out of a job because a computer can do something much faster and maybe even more technical than they can, right? Yeah, that's a reason to kind of be a little bit wary of this artificial intelligence stuff, right? Or are you going to say it?
What you were saying before, I just thought of like the movie Wall-E, and like we're gonna end up like the people in Wall-E if that happens.
We're going to end up with the people in the floaty chairs, all fat and just in front of our screen the whole time, yeah? Maybe. Well, with the rate at which we're manufacturing and producing waste, yeah, maybe.
It's much easier to be lazy.
It is. Yeah. You don't want to sit in a floaty chair and eat and watch YouTube videos all day? No? Doesn't sound good to you?
I already self-isolate because it doesn't stop.
Yeah. It's not clear if we dislike technology, if we're going to be able to backtrack from where we are. The future is uncertain. As we said before, our lives intimately depend on these technologies. I don't see companies and organizations just giving all that up, right? And saying, oh, let's be nicer and get away from this stuff because it makes money, right? It's efficient. It's really useful. So think about this issue. Think about whether or not you want to detach yourself from technology or lean further into it. One of the readings that we could have done today is on transhumanism. The idea that these biological bodies we have are just one step in humans' evolution, and we can perfect ourselves. We could eliminate death. We could upload our minds into computers someday with technology. The people who believe in this stuff, who are working on anti-aging technologies, artificial intelligences, body modifications, are known as transhumanists, who are often, a lot of times, trying to bring about what they call the singularity, which is a point in humanity's future at which technological progress is going to be so rapid that we're going to be innovating and learning new things about the universe at an exponential rate, such that we will transcend our mortal, fleshy bodies and become one with machines. Does that sound like a desirable, cool thing? Anybody? You'll be able to have machine hands, a total machine body if you want, right? Maybe someday you'll be able to upload your mind into a computer and you'll never die unless you want to die. You'll be able to download skills and knowledge with the snap of your fingers. Maybe someday you'll be able to go anywhere in the galaxy. We'll be able to construct simulations of anything that we can play around in. Doesn't that sound cool to anybody else? Or no? Yeah? Think of all the things that we could do with technology if we leaned into it, For a lot of people, that's desirable. And they actually see technology as our only means of salvation from ourselves. But yeah, there are a lot of questions that come up with this issue. What I would urge you to meditate on is, what effect is technology having on your life, especially social media, especially consuming digital media, consuming the news? Is it making you feel more fulfilled and happy about yourself? Or is it decreasing your self-worth? Is it making your relationships better? Or is it straining your relationships? Is it allowing you to live what you think an authentic spiritual life is? Or is it not? These are things that y'all should meditate on. Think about it. Okay. Does anybody have any final questions, concerns, comments? You do not have to follow this philosophy of life. This is just one perspective we're investigating in this unit. Okay. Have a great weekend. I will see y'all on Tuesday.